Hello and welcome to our weekly share on the Parsha with the Torah of the Yeshiva of Kelm. This week we're going to be looking at two Talmidim of Kelm, and that is Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe and Rabbi Dessler, two of the truly great um, uh, disciples of the great Alta, or rather the Alta's son. And in the case of Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, Rabbi Yerucham, who was probably the greatest Talmud of the Alta of Kelm, of them all, arguably so. We start with our usual dedications to people who could do with the refuah shlema. Orechaim ben Chami Yehudis, who is the little boy waiting for the lung transplant. Rafal Chai ben Sora, who is a dear friend and is doing very well. He should continue to do so. Yechesko Yehuda ben Yenta, who is struggling with illness in Eretz Yisrael, a cousin, and he should have a refuah shlema too. If you'd like to dedicate the shir, sponsor the shir, I should say, for somebody who's not been well, or to celebrate Simcha, Bar Mitzvah, Chasna, whatever, then please be in touch with me at rubensteinyy@gmail.com, rubensteinyy@gmail.com. Or if you like, yy at askrabbiyyy.com. Two choices. Yes, how much, people say, is the sponsorship? $180. Would be nice. Okay, so basically this week's Parsha is the Parsha of Re'eh. Extraordinarily exciting, fundamental of the Torah's Parshas. It is the Parsha that starts off with a statement about freedom of choice and challenge. And so I'll read and translate to you. Re'eh, Anochi noisin lefnechem hayom bracha u'klola. I'm setting before you today bracha, blessings, and klola, and curses. Esa bracha asher tishma el mitzvahs Hashem elokechem. There is a bracha which will come about if you listen to the words, listen to what Hashem Yisborach is saying to you. Then your life will be blessed. And the klola, obviously, the mitzvahs he command you. But klola, im lo tishma el mitzvahs Hashem elokechem. And the klola comes about if you don't. It's simply cause and effect. The Torah's pathways for you in life are going to bring you blessing. If you abandon it, it's not, I'm going to curse you. It is a curse. Healthy living as opposed to non-healthy living. There are outcomes, both physical and spiritual. This is the exciting Parsha because it starts off by saying freedom of choice. You have freedom of choice. I'm setting before you two choices, but it's entirely up to you to choose which one, in which direction you want to lead your life in. And there will be consequences, but you can embrace that or you can reject that. It's entirely up to you. Freedom of choice. Now, of course, freedom of choice is a great matter of debate. Is it the case that we have freedom of choice? Surely, if Hashem knows what we're going to do before we do it, then we have no choice but to do it, and therefore what we were supposed to do, or rather what we did or will do, is preordained, and we have no freedom of choice. The Rambam famously discusses this in his Moreh HaNevuchim, his the Guide for the Perplexed, his great philosophical work. And the Rambam says there, he discusses this very briefly at the beginning of the Sefer, and says that it would be cruel and chas v'sholom to imagine that Hashem created us so that we had to do things which were wrong. We had no choice but to do things which were wrong, and then punishes us for it. Well, that would be cruel. It must be, if he commands us to do things, we can choose to get it right. We can choose to get it wrong as well. But it must be doable. Because if we could not get it right, and if you don't do this mitzvah, you're going to suffer this punishment, and we just said klolas and curses, then, and we had no choice but to do it, it would be cruelty. So says the Rambam, it's the way of idiots to consider that is the conclusion we reach. And famously, when he discusses this again, and this is in his Mishnah Torah, it's easy to remember, it's halachas of Teshuvah, then it's chapter 5, and it's halacha 5. So he famously says, I'll share this with you. Shematam, or perhaps you'll say, God obviously knows what's going to be, what's going to take place before it takes place. Yodesh is that tzaddik or Russia. He knows the person is going to be a tzaddik, live a life of saintliness and outstanding behavior and spiritual growth. Or lo yoda, or you could say, well, or maybe he doesn't know. So if you say im yoda shu shi tzaddik, if he knows that the person is going to be a tzaddik, by definition, it's impossible for him not to be a tzaddik. God doesn't make mistakes. You say that God knows it's going to be good, but it might be that he's not going to be good, then God doesn't know. Then God clearly doesn't know. This is the classic question. So he discusses it more in Nevuchim, he discusses it here as well. Now, it seems to be that he avoids answering the question. The answer is so huge, it would encompass the entire landmass of the world or the depths of the oceans. And many incredibly deep and fundamental concepts are hang or depend on the outcome of or the conclusion of that investigation. You should know. I want you to know clearly what I'm going to tell you. It's already explained to you. And then he goes into say that even though it's very, very hard to explain, like the depths of the sea, how this works out, just trust me, effectively, what he says. Hashem knows what you're going to do, and you still have freedom of choice. Very often, the commentator called the Ravid, if you're watching this, you'll see the Ravid on that side of the page, who, as a glosses, I think is the word, his commentary is challenging the Rambam. He starts off by saying, this is not the Derech of Chachamim. The Rambam raises the question, but he doesn't give an answer. My Rebbe pointed out that, in actual fact, he does give an answer, and it's in the words of the Rambam himself. Just for very quickly, so I mean, as you say, as the Rambam says, the answer to this would encompass the landmass of the world. It's so huge. However, just to give you a headline, imagine something that happened in the past, and when I used to live in Manchester, 97 Singleton Road, our next door neighbour in those days was a very nice Jewish fellow and his wife, whom we liked a lot, but they weren't religious. I want you to imagine you're visiting my house, and I say to you, you know what? Before we have breakfast, I wonder what my non-religious neighbour is about to have for breakfast. Come with me. So we peek over the window ledge, and we see him sitting at the breakfast table, and his wife comes in with a tray, and there are two plates. We overhear him saying, "This is the kosher meal, the kosher breakfast, and this is the non-kosher breakfast. The non-kosher breakfast is the traditional English ham and eggs. The kosher breakfast is Wurst." Kosher Wurst and eggs. And we see him struggling which he's going to choose. He looks at the ham and it tastes nice, or it looks nice and tasty, struggles with his conscience, moves back to the Wurst, looks cold and not very appealing, back and forth, back and forth. I say, wait a minute, quickly, back to my house. You're perplexed. You rush back with me. I say, I have got a time machine. And so I take you to the time machine. We plug ourselves in, however the time machine works. And we go 10 minutes into the future. I say, quick, let's see what he chose. So we look over the window sill again, and there he is going, The plate with the bacon and eggs is sadly only crumbs. The Wurst and eggs is, the yolk is congealing. He hasn't touched that one. So quick, back to the present. Back to my house, back to the present, looking over. He's still struggling with his conscience which one he's going to choose. Do we know the choice he made? Yes. Did we make him choose it? No. The ability to look into the future, which clearly God can do, is merely gives him, as it were, the ability to see what you chose. But it had it been the case that the fellow eats the kosher breakfast, then that's what you'd see looking into the future. That's what Hashem would see. It's something to give us a little bit of a glimpse of what it is means to know and be convinced that Hashem can know what you do or will do, and still for us to have freedom of choice. But here it's clearly saying that we do have freedom of choice. And don't be confused by that. Don't think God's pre-knowledge of that it diminishes from our choices. No, he knows what we're going to choose, but we are the architect of that choice. So I want to take you to Rabbi Yerucham of Mir, previously the Talmud of Rabbi Simcha Zissel of Kelm's great Talmud, Rabbi Shalom of Volba. And in his Pali Shor, he says something which is absolutely astonishing. No, he is very, very much a Talmud of Rabbi Yerucham, so it's deep and philosophical stuff. But let's read it a little bit. This is, of course, when the Jewish people come out of the splitting of the Red Sea. And the Apostle says, the Jewish people saw everything that Hashem had done to Egypt for Yeroham, it's Hashem, and the people feared God, and the Yamina Hashem and Moshe Abdai. And they believed in Hashem and Moshe, his servant. He wants to point out, notice the language, notice the order of the language. They feared God and believed in God. Fear came first. Listen to this. So he said, Bevadai, Masha Nikra B'Torah Amuna. So he says, first of all, when the Torah talks about they believed in Hashem, it's not talking about the level of Amuna that we normally use in conversation, you and I mean by it, when he says, for example, Amuna, faith, is not what we know, being referred to here in the Torah. It's not what we normally talk about. Do you believe in God? Yes, I believe that God exists. That's not what it's talking about here. Or Torah min Shemaim, or the concept of Torah being given from Shemaim. Do you believe that? Yes, I believe that. When it says they believe in God, it means something different. That level, that simple childlike level of definition and understanding of belief, that's not what the Torah is concerned about. His galus elukis atzma. When it says that they stood at the Yam Suf and they feared God and they saw God, they believed in God, it means they believed, they literally touched, as it were, the essence of God. It's a totally different understanding. But if that's what they saw, they were at such a level they actually saw complete revelation of God. Who needs belief? What's belief got to do with it? But remember, it says fear came first and then came belief. Therefore, the Amunah that is talking about, the faith that is talking about, the Jewish people experienced at Kriyas Yamsuf, is something which I can't go into in great depth here. However, but we still have to ask the question, surely it's because you believe, then you come to fear God. If you believe in God, then you'd be scared of what you could do if you don't keep his laws, which is back to Parshas Re'eh. If you keep my laws, you get blessings. If you don't, you get curses. Well, if you believe that, then you'll be scared of the consequences of not doing what God told you. So surely it has to be that you believe that first. But here it says you've got to fear it first. Fear God first. And then you come to believe. Scratch head. So what does that mean? So Lama Hagdima Hatara Yira Lamana. So why does it therefore says that they feared God and then they believed in God? Surely that faith has to be planted first in order for fear of God to grow or to fruit. Says Rav Shlomo, but the answer is im shikar al amuna. Interesting. So he asks rather tongue-in-cheek and rhetorically, would it really be possible to have a conversation about theology and belief in God with somebody who is very drunk? Clearly not. You're talking about he is out of his head, I think is the phrase. He's out of his head with alcohol. Unless the person, as it were, sleeps it off and now sober, then you can speak to him. What you need is sobriety, clarity, then you can speak to the person. But when he's drunk, that's not going to work. Skip over the page. And now listen to this. This is so good. So he says, he carried on right on the page to say, it's known that the world, the name for world is Olam. And Olam means God is hidden. You can't see him, as it were, you can't touch him. He's hidden in this world. You just don't see it. Now, what is this halomas? What is this hiding? I missed out a whole chunk, by the way. What is this hiding of God's reality in the world mean? Obviously, the world is physical. It's a material, physical world. And our senses, smell, taste, touch, etc., hearing, these all relate to physical stimuli. You touch something which is physically there. You hear something which is physically there. We hear physical sounds. We see physical signs, physical things. Time and time in Gashrim, we taste physical things. We touch physical things. But God is not physical. And therefore, the tools, our being is not equipped, our physical being is in no way equipped to engage with God, who is not physical. These senses all engage with the physical, and God's not physical. Therefore, Harizehu Alam is that's what it means. It's incredible. If you're talking about something being hidden, nothing can be more profoundly hidden than something which exists in a totally different dimension. You can't see, we've got a spectrum of light, but of course there is light that we don't see. We've got an audio range as well. But there are sounds above and below that we'll never hear. But that, talking to God, there's nothing in him that our senses are able to as it were, penetrate. As Hashem is Baruch Shehu Rav Shalit, Ika B'Shoresh L'Kol Almin Kulan Kame Kol L'Chashinin Oisa In Around Cloud Oilam. So that you'll never see God in this world. In Yosha B'Sisa Elyon B'Tzil Yosana, he exists in an entirely different dimension. Who is Baruch Musasa B'Sach Loma? God is there, is hidden in this world. That's what he means. What it means when we were talking about before, that fear of God has to come before belief in God, and belief in God is the actual perception of God. And what it really means is the fear, the reality, the confrontation with God that the Jewish people achieved at the Yam Suf. Fear actually means they saw him. They came clear. It was clear to them. And then they could believe. As the analogy I gave before, can you discuss deep issues, theological issues, any issues, I suppose, but deep issues with somebody who's very, very drunk? He doesn't have the tools to deal with it. You have to sober him up. You have to transform him from one state, drunkenness, to sobriety. The Jewish people, when they stood at Mount Sinai, there was a transformation, a transformative state. When they saw God, the miracle there, fear means the reality of what God was like, and that's when they sobered up, and then they could come to believe in God. What it's saying there is that God is actually there, but you have to look very, very hard to be able to see him. But you must be sober, you must be clear thinking, in order to achieve the next stage, which is Amunah. Interesting idea. Now, David HaMelech says this: Hashemayim misaprin kvod kel. The whole of the universe, it all attests to the existence of God. There's a common denominator, obviously running through that which is created by the same architect, the same builder. There's so much in the world which attests, says David HaMelech, to the existence of God. But we don't see it. I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and I was staying with one of my very oldest friends, an ex-student of mine from Manchester University days. He's called Ian Myers. In fact, I've written about him. Will be appearing in my column in Hamadiyah in a couple of months' time. I'm ahead for a change. And when I was asking about his background, because he came from a non-religious background, or non-observant background, would be a better way to put it, and became an observant Jew. And I said to him, was there any particular moment, any light bulb moment, where you had an epiphany and, it all changed? He said, no. And he invoked the Talmud story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva sees the drops of water falling onto a rock or a stone, and cumulatively over the centuries, the drops hitting and having some microscopic impact on the stone, cumulatively had created a hole which had borne through the hole, through the rock. He said it was like that in his life. It was drop, 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 no plop, drop, drop, drop. Not huge drops, small, incremental change. He said that was his story. And I asked him, what rabbis he'd come across after, he left me, or maybe during the time, I can't remember. And so he talked about several of them. And he talked about Rabbi Abram Twersky, Zechar Tzaddik Livrocha, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, Lahavdil, Something called Rabbi Danny Kirsch of Ohr Sameach, Ohr Sameach in London, and JLE, the psychoanalyst Rabbi Jonathan Dove. And I said, after he gave me the list, I said, was there any common denominator linking them all? And he said they were all logical. Everything they said made sense. They obviously lived that belief as well. But if you can't see something, if you want to learn, as I've told you, I'm sure many times before, I play several musical instruments very badly. Why? Because I taught myself. If you want to, in order to, as it were, achieve anything, you need a teacher. Whether it's mathematics or whether it's riding a bicycle, whatever it is, you need a teacher if you want to do it properly. The same thing comes to this question we're discussing. I can't see God. How do I come to see him? You won't be able to see it yourself. You need a teacher, and you have to be sure, as my friend Ian was about the rabbis and teachers that came into his life, that he felt that they were straight and logical and intelligent. Oh, I should have said kind. And they obviously lived what they believed. There was a consistency running through them that allowed him to trust them. But Rabbi Dessler famously says in Mixed Million, page 52, and this is a very, very long chapter, so we're only going to be able to squeeze a drop or two out of this, but he famously says that a person only thinks about that which they're interested in. It's only if you're interested in something you think about it. He gives an example. People who collect stamps, philatelists, philatelists will spend hours with great passion and excitement telling all about the shape of the stamp and the color and how it's printed, etc., etc. They're interested in it, but I'm not interested in it, so therefore, frankly, find that pretty boring after a short amount of time, no matter how much they say the stamp is worth. You have to be interested in it, but he says, and this is where it's exciting, Rabbi Dessler says, suppose you had somebody who was, let's say, he thought, or he'd been working for decades to find the cure for cancer, and he thought he was near a breakthrough or had reached a breakthrough. He's just got one more test to run in order to confirm his assumptions. Says Rabbi Dessler, wouldn't the scientist, before he performs the experiment, absolutely make sure that all the instruments that he's going to be using to measure the experiment are accurate? So he said, well, if we're talking about this question, you've got to consider whether or not the instrument, does God exist or not, the instrument that is going to be assessing that question is accurate, and the instrument in this case is a human brain. So says Rabbi Dessler, if the human brain is deployed or used generally for the sciences, STEM subjects as they're called, science, technology, something, don't know what the is, mathematics, etc., then these things generally, of course, not completely free of bias, but generally, mathematics is a good example. Then mathematics, you just want to know what X is. And therefore, you can more or less rely on the human brain. But if the brain is dealing with something which itself, that the individual who's assessing the machine during the assessment, is him in his or herself prejudice and bias in any particular way, wants to see a certain outcome, then you couldn't trust the person. So our question is, or started off with, our Sedra, I'm giving you a choice. Doesn't God foreknowledge preclude me having a choice? No. You can still choose. Ignore my ability to know what you're going to choose. That's not actually relevant. You can choose for yourself. But if I can't see God, no, you can see God. But there is a formula that has to come first. You have to, as it were, not be drunk. Your mind has to be clear. Clear from prejudice and bias and wanting to see an outcome. The famous story of Chaim Volozhin, whose Talmud, one of his Talmudim from Yeshiva, had gone off and abandoned that lifestyle, had gone and become a professor in Berlin with a superb brain, given up all of the values he used to hold dear and the teachings of his great rabbi, Chaim Volozhin. But once he was coming back to Russia from Germany, to some academic conference, I don't know, St. Petersburg, wherever it was, but he took a a diversion to go and see his old Rebbe. His Rebbe welcomed him, despite the fact he'd rejected his teachings, sat him down for a meal, and afterwards they sat down for a schmooze. And the Talmud said to the Rebbe, there's three questions of big questions I always have with Judaism. Perhaps you can help me answer them. And the Rebbe put up his hand and said, tell me, did you have the questions before you abandoned Judaism or after? He said, after. Well, in that case, I can't help you. There are only answers to questions. There are no answers to answers. If a person doesn't want to embrace the truth and feels guilty about it, they will often justify their disbelief or lack of belief on the basis of rationalization. They will rationalize why they don't, or why they're justified in not believing something. There are only answers to questions, but this fellow's three questions were not questions. They were the answers he generated in order to justify his life choice. You have to be sure that the machine that you're using to assess whether or not the choices that the Torah says are yours in life are correct, and the pathway you want to take in order to have the best outcomes from those choices are correct. But you're obviously very biased when it comes to yourself. That's why you need rabbis who are clear and who are logical and who are consistent in order to guide you in this. So when the Torah in this week's parsha says, I'm setting before you choices, these are big choices. But you never have to make big choices on your own. In fact, if you try and make your choices on your own, you're almost inevitably going to fail. The bigger the choice, the more important the ramifications is when you turn around and you do what it says in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, Asa Rav. Get yourself a teacher, get yourself a mentor. Get ones that satisfy and check all the boxes. So my friend Ian Myers outlined when he found his rabbis to make you be able to see what normally you won't be able to see with your own eyes. I wish you all a very, very good Shabbos. Now, I'm going to be in Israel for the next 2 weeks, so it might be difficult for me to post this sharing. So I hope I'll find some way to do it. If not, I'll see you in 3 weeks' time. Good Shabbos.